Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Richard Evans. I'm Rees Professor of History and President of Wolfson College, and also was many years ago a graduate student at St Antony's College, Oxford, at the same time as Margaret. So it's a particular pleasure to welcome you all and to this second in this series of lectures. Now, as you probably know, the Humanitas professorships were created by the vision and the imagination of Lord Weidenfeld, George Weidenfeld, one of the 20th century's and 21st century's great publishers, and it's wonderful to see him here tonight sitting in the second row. So I think we should just applaud George. And of course there are a large number of these Humanitas professorships now here in Cambridge and at the other place, and they've been very successful, and particularly I think this series already, from what I've heard about last night. Unfortunately I couldn't be here, I was in Munich giving a lecture myself, but I'm looking forward very much to tonight's lecture. This particular professorship in war studies has been made possible by the support of Sir Ronald Grierson, and it's also a great pleasure to see him here tonight. So I think we should give him a applause. I'm not going to spend many words introducing Margaret Macmillan. I'm assuming that all or nearly all of you were here last night, but she has scored a great success with her book, a recent book on the origins of the First World War, and of course what she's talking about tonight, thinking about war before 1914, relates very closely to that. So I'll leave the rest to Margaret.
Well, thank you very much, and it is a great pleasure to be here and to be introduced by Richard, and also a great pleasure to have here Lord Weidenfeld and Sir Ronald Grierson, who've done so much for this series. Thank you both very much indeed, and thank you to people in Cambridge for coming patiently to listen to me yet again. Last night I was talking about the ways in which war and the relationship between war and society was changing in the 19th century. War was becoming something which involved far more people, the shift in thinking which was spurred by the French Revolution, among other things, from people seeing themselves as subjects to seeing themselves as citizens, helped to bring about a new relationship between the state and the individual. People were no longer seen or no longer saw themselves as subjects, but increasingly saw themselves as sharing in the polity, sharing in the government of the state, and therefore having a corresponding obligation to the polity, to the state, to defend it if needed. That was one of the important changes in the 19th century, but of course there were others. War was getting larger in scale and in duration thanks to the Industrial Revolution, which made it possible to summon up much bigger armies, to move much bigger armies, and to keep them in the field for much longer, and to continue to equip them as they were in the field. War was also becoming, thanks to the various successes of European industry and science and technology, a lot more deadly. The Europeans were getting better at producing armies and navies. They were also getting better at killing each other. There was also, as the century went on, a move towards total war, a move towards seeing not just the enemy soldiers as those who had to be fought, but seeing the whole society which had produced them and sustained them as part of the enemy. And so the old barriers, which were always in danger of being breached, but the old barriers between the military, the combatants, and the civilians now began to be blurred increasingly. And by the time you got to the First World War, you were going to see the British talking about the German race or the German nation as an enemy, and you were going to see the Germans talking in the same ways about their enemies, and you were going to see civilians increasingly in various ways getting caught up in war, either being forced to do labor as objects of war, or in the case of German civilians being blockaded by the British Navy and suffering at least a share of the deprivations that followed that. What was also happening to war in the 19th century, and that's particularly what I'd like to talk about tonight, was that war was becoming increasingly powerful on the defensive side of combat. In other words, the ways of defending were now becoming stronger, and the ways of attacking were having real problems in dealing with that. It was becoming increasingly costly to attack a very well-defended position.